It's very important to let people understand that behind this movement, there are forces like the DPP of Taiwan, NED, the USA, National Endowment for Democracy, and also the Five Eyes Secret Services. Whoever is behind this movement are just pawns in a war between China and the USA. Since there is this law, I'm more willing to stay in Hong Kong and keep on living. If there was not such a law, I would just leave because it's a chaos and Hong Kong was just on the brink of anarchy.
I love Hong Kong. It's the freest place in the world. And I cannot continue to see it torn down by some chaotic guys. I don't call them students, I call them terrorists because they don't know what freedom is. They are so free. They are more free than the Swiss.
Grüezi miteinander and bonjour à tous, it's Keybros. Welcome to the third episode of our brand new program called SOFTtalk, where unlike BBC's Hard Talk, the interviewees won't find it hard to talk. So today, we're very pleased to invite two guests from Switzerland. They're Angelo and Roderick. Before we start, please remember to subscribe to our channel, pressing the red button below, like the video by giving a thumbs up, and also share this video with your friends and family members. Right, so let's start with a short introduction of yourselves. Bonjour, Angelo. I'll first start with you.
Hi, Keybros. I like very much your show. It's a great initiative that you have here to let people understand better about what is happening in Hong Kong. So my name is Angelo. I'm half Swiss, half Italian. I've been in China for 25 years and the last 3 years in Hong Kong. I'm a financial analyst. I joined the movement for peace a year ago when I saw the violence in Hong Kong. I want to speak out for justice and to let people understand about what is going on in Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. Grüezi Ros, I'll now hand it over to you.
Excellent. Your Swiss German is just perfect. Fantastic. I'm impressed. So my name is Roderick. I'm 52 years old, Swiss, half Swiss, actually also half Italian, like Angelo. You can nearly not find 100% pure Swiss. It's very difficult. We're the best bastards in this world. And when I say this, it's not just for fun. It's really, we're a good melting pot of cultures and mentalities that makes us so open-minded and also brought us to the wiseness to be neutral, which we are not right now in your case particularly. And that's a shame for me. I love Hong Kong. First time I traveled to Hong Kong, I was 14 years young. So that's 38 years ago now. I stayed for many months and years now in Hong Kong. I return to Hong Kong per year 4 to 5 times, and also to mainland China from Hong Kong most of the time, but also to Beijing or Chongqing. I really love the Asian culture, the Chinese culture, and particularly Hong Kong, which is unique in this world, which is the freest place in the world. It's the coolest place in the world. And I cannot continue to see it torn down by some chaotic guys. I don't call them students, I call them terrorists because they don't know what freedom is. They are so free. They are more free than the Swiss.
So which parts of Switzerland are both of you from?
So I'm from the French part. In Switzerland, we tend to speak 2 or 3 national languages and then English. So it's very multicultural. It's a very interesting place, considering 4 different cultures within a small country.
I live in an area, it's really the borderline between the French-speaking and the German-speaking part in Biel, where also the headquarters is of the most famous Swatch Group, and also where all the Rolex movements are made. We call our city the capital of watchmaking in Switzerland. It's 1 hour away from Angelo.
Both of you from different parts of Switzerland, we can hopefully provide different perspectives to the situation here. Plus, they've also lived in Hong Kong and China for many years, so they can give you a first-hand experience of the city and the country. Right, so without further ado, let's begin with the Hong Kong protests last year. So what are your views on the protests? Do you think they're justified or do you think they're too violent? How they've actually affected both of you personally?
I think it's very important to understand how the protest started. So there was an issue related to an extradition law. People, I think they did not understand what was behind these laws. And there was also a lot of manipulation from the media, which are in the hands of anti-government people. So a lot of people came out. They claimed to have 2 million people that came out. And actually, in reality, there were some studies from the Hong Kong University and also from Reuters that there was around 200,000 people that came out that day. I have to say it's a lot of people. But what happened with time is that the radicals, the most violent elements, they took over this whole movement, and it was hijacked by, we call them terrorists. I think this was not a genuine movement. It was manipulated by foreign forces. It's very important to let people understand that behind this movement, there are forces like the DPP of Taiwan, NED, the USA, National Endowment for Democracy, and also the Five Eyes secret services. It's just a proxy war between the US and China. Whoever is behind this movement are just pawns in a war between China and the USA. They gradually changed into a very violent movement. It was not about the extradition law. It was more a color revolution, very similar to Maidan revolution in Ukraine. I think with time, people will better understand this movement was being used by Western powers.
The 5 initial demands, I think by now most of the protesters have forgotten what they were. I was a bit surprised when last year in September I was coming out in one Chai station from the MTR. All of a sudden I have these guys in front of me taking the pipes for fire extinguishing, just smashing TV screens and breaking glass, coming out there, and I see the policemen holding up warning signs that they're going to fire tear gas. I'm in the middle of this, coming from a very peaceful place, knowing and loving Hong Kong for being as peaceful as my place. I call Hong Kong my second home. This was not my home. This was a shock. That's how I perceived these protests. And I was thinking, what are they protesting for or about? This is a freer place than even my place, because in Switzerland, everything is so small. Whatever you say, your neighbor will know it tomorrow. So yes, we have freedom of speech, but you always have to be careful when and where you say something. In Hong Kong, you can speak freely. It's a very, very free place. So I was thinking, why do they protest for freedom? They have the freest place in the world. Have they ever worked hard? They are too violent. I have nothing against somebody who protests, as long as they do it in a legitimate and funded way with arguments. But just destroying the whole infrastructure, burning down things, attacking elderly people, putting gas on old people's light fire on them, and even one man was killed. This is not a legitimate way to demonstrate for convictions that are eventually justified or not. The way is that if you want to change something, you can argue, you can go on the streets. And Hong Kong showed in a very exemplary way that they let the people go on the streets. Millions of people go on the streets. They can demonstrate. It's legitimate to do that. I think we should really open the eyes to the Western people that there is freedom, that you can demonstrate, that you can say anything you want in Hong Kong. Yes, they have affected personally my daily life routine. One of my friends, who is almost a brother, I see him more, lives in Hong Kong, than my brother, who lives 500 meters away. So of course this affects my personal relations with and for Hong Kong. I'm worried about my friend. I'm worried about what's going on, not only with coronavirus, but of course because of the protests, which in the way that they have developed is unnecessary.
How did the Swiss media portray the protests, and also how did the general population view the protests as well?
In Switzerland, it was pretty much the same as the whole Western world. We tend to have a more neutral approach to even the media, so it's not as radical as what you could have from the BBC or from the USA. But what happens is that there's no Swiss reporters that can cover the Hong Kong events. So what they do is that they take information from the AFP, from Reuters, and they just report it. They tend to not put too much opinions behind it because it's quite neutral, but it's taking side for democracy, of course. There's lots of shortcuts. Whenever you use the words, oh, this is a movement for democracy, well, people take side. Unfortunately, they don't have the full picture of the reality of what is happening in Hong Kong.
Even Switzerland, that we're neutral, we're in the middle of Europe. Europe historically was strongly influenced by America. For many decades now, European societies have not necessarily tried to inspire themselves from the East, but more from the West. So, of course, perception is biased, especially pro-American. I just saw an analysis the other day here in the Swiss media. It was a questionnaire sent out to the readers of one of the most popular APP that is read daily by the people. It's called 20 Minutes, where they asked if the Swiss citizens think that the Swiss government should be more strongly finger-pointing the policies of the Chinese government in regards of Hong Kong. And 85% of the Swiss population is for it. Shows how one-sided the things are portrayed here. There is not ways to display and show how things are on the other side of the coin. There's always two sides on the coin. We only see one here, and that's really disturbing me personally, that we only listen to the mainstream ideas that especially the Americans want to generate in Europe about China and Hong Kong.
Now we'll turn to the rather controversial Hong Kong national security law, which has been just enacted for like a month. So do you think it's necessary, or do you think it's actually an overboard measure by China?
I think it's a must. If you look all around the world, every single country has a national security law. If you look at the basic law of Hong Kong, which is the mini constitution, there's Article 23 that states clearly since 1997 they should enact a law of national security. It was the responsibility of the Hong Kong government. They actually did an attempt in 2003. Because of opposition, they didn't do it back then. I think it has become a top priority to have a national security law, especially when you look at what is happening right now. There are signs of sedition, conspiracy with foreign powers, and there are clearly acts of terrorism. So I think it's only normal. It doesn't make any sense when you have like Western countries pointing the finger at Hong Kong and China for national security law. The US, there are around 20 national security laws. There's something very important that happened in Hong Kong. When they enacted this law, there was a petition just before that where 3 million people signed this petition for this national security law. And what is sad about this is that no Western media related this information. It shows the clear bias of Western media. So there's a very strong support of Hong Kong people, and we feel way better. Personally, since there is this law, I'm more willing to stay in Hong Kong and keep on living. If there was not such a law, I would just leave because it's a chaos and Hong Kong was just on the brink of anarchy.
I definitely think that the national security law is a must. 3 million people who signed the petition is nearly 60% of all the people in Hong Kong who have voting rights. So it shows that the very vast majority, and this not one media does report this here in Europe or in Switzerland, to our people here, that the people were in favor of this law. And of course, every sovereign country has this kind of law. I'll give you a simple example. It's about extradition. The European community, together with Switzerland, has a treaty. When I make an offense against a law in Germany, I will be extradited to court if I have done something that is criminal. It's just normal. It's just logical. If I rob a bank in Berlin or in Madrid, I will be summoned to court in this country, and that's just okay. As long as I don't do anything illegal, why should I worry?
Now, Switzerland is one of the 27 countries which officially opposed the law and condemned China at the United Nations Human Rights Council. So contrary to popular belief and opinion, Switzerland is not neutral on this law. As a Swiss citizen, what are your thoughts on your foreign ministry's stance on the law?
I was very shocked at this stance from the foreign minister. I actually wrote something on Twitter about this question, and I clearly told him that I feel really ashamed at the Swiss stance. If you look at the 27 countries, there's a few countries like Italy, they took a neutral stance on this. And it seems like Switzerland had some pressure probably from the US to take such a stance. And I think there's a clearly lack of understanding of what was really happening in Hong Kong. I feel very sad about this. Unfortunately, the minds of people are manipulated by the media.
I'm really ashamed that we took this opportunistic stance. It was really not the right move that our Minister of Foreign Affairs did. And you know on which side he is, politically speaking, in our country, very close to the populist party, that could create some regretful relations with China. It was, for me, a very stupid move of our government. And you can again see how strongly one-sided influence is of the Western media that is being put under pressure from the United States.
There's actually a big conflict and divide between some Hong Kong people and also people in mainland China. As someone who has lived in both places, what is your advice for the people in Hong Kong and also mainland China to resolve this conflict?
This conflict is due to lack of understanding and manipulation of information. If you look at the playbook of Cloud Revolution, one of the elements which is really important in order for a revolution to be successful is to antagonize people. So what they have tried, and they actually did not succeed absolutely, was to antagonize Hong Kong native people and mainland Chinese. So you could see many times mainland Chinese should be beaten up. I mean, clearly lynched by a lot of people. This civil war, one was very emotional from the pandemic movement. And on the other side, the blue side, you had people, they were just talking rationally. What is the rationale behind democracy? Do you actually know what is democracy? Do you know your enemy? I think right now the divide is just about reaching those two. Each of them work with a different part of the brain. One is rational and one is emotional. They really need to start learning about history and about understanding what is the sense of Hong Kong in the geopolitical world.
I would say, having lived in both places, before you speak, make sure that your words would be better than your silence would have been. I believe that people have to learn to listen to each other again and to have the willingness to find a compromise. One of the big strengths of Switzerland, and one of the reasons why it also allowed us to remain always a little bit apart in between two parties who have an argument together, is that we listen to both and try to find a compromise. That's the only way. But it means you have to consider and respect the different cultures and mentalities. What Angelo pointed at is a good question. What is democracy, and what does democracy in Hong Kong mean compared to democracy in Switzerland? It's not the same thing. And I think we should not even start to say or believe that we can impose democracy everywhere in the world in the same way. Did someone request for democracy in Hong Kong? A part of some terrorists, I call them terrorists too, not students, who don't really know what it is to live in a dictatorship. We have people here now, they are complaining when they are forced to put on the mask because they're going to the supermarket and they say it's a dictatorship. I think it's an insult to somebody who lives in a dictatorship to hear somebody in Switzerland complain that he has to wear a mask to go into a supermarket and call the authorities that they are dictators dictating him to wear a mask. They should go and live once in North Korea to understand what a dictatorship is. You have all the freedoms to speak out loud what you want in Hong Kong. I have experienced this for 3 decades. Some people were more worried and scared when I crossed the border to Shenzhen in 1991. It was, of course, more difficult to talk about politics than now. We're talking now here about Hong Kong, which was always free. It was not as free then than it is after 1997. Hong Kong became a much more free place when it was handed over back to China in 1997. Definitely. That's the advice I would like to give to the parties involved. Listen to each other, accept certain other opinions, and try to integrate them and find a compromise.
I also agree that civil discourse and rationality are very important if we want to move ahead as a city. Since you mentioned about China, we'll return to Switzerland and China's relations. Just a bit of historical context. Switzerland is the first and only continental European country to conclude a free trade agreement with China. There is another European country that did that. That was Iceland, but it's not in continental Europe. China is also Switzerland's top trading partner in Asia. And actually, surprisingly, the Hong Kong SAR is ranked third as well. So what is your view of modern China-Switzerland relations?
I think the current events will not influence much the trading position between China and Switzerland. I think Swiss are very pragmatic and they will not follow the strong stance of, let's say, the UK and the US. And for business purpose, they will really stay very neutral there. So it's going to be just wait and see what happens. But as long as there's no violation of human rights, China is not being violence back, they remain rational, there's no reason that things should change between the relationship between China and Switzerland.
Fact is, the Americans have already figured a long time ago that they are no more the leaders. Their behavior shows that they have understood, not yet accepted, but understood that they're no more the world number one. It is China already now. And I think the Swiss will, over time, just smartly adapt to play in the right field. Let's be honest, I really think this is also a quality of Switzerland. We are honest people. We are opportunists. And we are smart enough in this opportunism that we have, that we know that China is today a leading technological nation in this world. I mean, all the items I use now, whether it's this, whether it's this, come from China. We all know it. It's a fact. The Americans don't like this because they used to be number one. When you become number two and you were number one, there's two ways. Either you accept it and you try to become again number one, or you play fairly and you stay number two, which is still fine. There's 220 other countries behind you. Or you behave like the Americans do, who want to destroy everything before they have to leave the stage. And it cannot be that America destroys everything. I mean, really everything. That's what they're doing under this president that they have right now. The first thing is, look what he does now with TikTok. If China would have done the same thing to an American company, it would be called technology theft. But because I don't call him president because he doesn't deserve this title. I call him actually the clown in the White House. He wants to be re-elected by all means. He organizes this event. And some smart lady in America figured out that she can trick this guy who was bragging that he will have 1 million people coming to his event. Thanks to TikTok, she made the whole stadium was empty. He's so pissed off that he makes it a political agenda to kill a startup company that could have been easily an American company. And by the way, the company is even registered in the United States. And now, just as a revenge, he is giving 45 days to this company to be sold to Microsoft. If this is not dictatorship, please explain me what is then dictatorship. This for me is not the free world economy. This is not the economy that America always describes as to be fair. This is theft. This is criminal.
Last question before the break. Since you talked about people not wearing masks in Switzerland, how has Switzerland been affected by the coronavirus pandemic? Do Swiss people blame China for starting the outbreak, or actually are they rather neutral?
I think in Switzerland, we're very pragmatic. We understand very well that virus has no nationality. Virus can start from anywhere in the world. I haven't heard a Swiss blaming China on this. I think it would be just stupid. Swiss people are intelligent enough just to understand this is not a Chinese virus. Up to now, we still don't know where this virus comes from. The latest information we have is that this virus appeared before in Spain and in Italy. Time will tell exactly where the virus comes from. But no matter what, not the China problem, it's not a Swiss problem, it's a global problem. The US here lost big opportunity to show leadership in fighting the virus, because if the US had taken a stance to fight the virus and lead the world rather than just creating tension, we could be in a much better position right now.
This virus is a good wake-up call that, number one, we are really lucky. We all know we're living with viruses since centuries, since the humanity exists. Just now we are a little bit unlucky because this one in particular is very aggressive. For once, so aggressive that we have to wear masks, and we do here actually, some do. Now in public transportation it's mandatory. We're even talking about reintroducing it into all markets, supermarkets, malls, etc. That's fine, I have no problem with that. And most of the Swiss, once the government says you have to do it, they will do it. It's no big deal. Even if they don't like it, they do it. But I think we should think the other way around. For all these years, we have been so lucky that there was not such an aggressive virus every year. Now we have one who a little bit gives us constraints in our daily lives. That's okay. We manage for now very well. We are smart enough to know that the virus doesn't know borders, continents. The mayor of New York, Mr. Cuomo, said the other day, it's bouncing from one region to the other. And it will go on like this for a long time. Maybe this thing will disappear or mutate to less aggressive one day, or someday we will have a vaccine that will be acceptable for everybody to inject, or for those who don't want to, will not inject it. They will not inject it and they can still live with it. It's not a killer per se, just a very aggressive virus. But again, this guy over there in America calls it the China virus, shows that this guy is really having a racist and aggressive agenda, finger pointing, and also try taking leadership. This is a real worldwide tragedy of a lack of leadership. We have World Health Organization that, thank goodness, China has now taken over and sponsors. America just pulls out because they have probably left behind them the biggest mess. I mean, this is total tragedy that in one of the countries that used to have the highest number of top universities in the world, you have no leadership, and the only guy that they should listen to is a guy from the science, Dr. Fauci, is now even biased by some clown doctor who comes up with some demonized stories, and the people over there believe this shit. Shows to which extent Western culture is perverted and, no longer really this leading culture that they brag or pretend to want to be. I'm lucky to live in the country where we are still well educated, and as Angela said, we believe our authorities, we believe science. Just to give you a good example about very well lived democracy. Our Federal Office of Health made a major mistake in communication 2 days ago. They said that the highest number of infections comes from nightclubs and bars and discos, and people still can go there. The number of access is limited. They figured out that there was some wrong handling in the numbers. In America, they would have never admitted and apologized publicly. That's what our government did yesterday, apologized to the public and said it's a major mistake. We make a correction of the numbers. That's well-lived and exercised democracy. That you stand there, you accept to lose face, which we know in Hong Kong and in China we don't like to. In Switzerland, you make such a mistake. It's about lives. Our government had the courage to stand there, to admit it, and to excuse to the population.
Merci. So we'll now take a break. In part 2, we'll be discussing the meaning and also future of Switzerland's neutrality in light of the ever-growing US-China conflict. So please stay tuned. All right, see you in the next part. Au revoir and tschüss.